Hidaka Masamune was starting another normal day at high school, a normal day for him at least. As usual, everyone was sitting or walking in pairs, leaving Hidaka all alone. The only time he ever spoke was when he was the target of bullying. This time, Saiki Kenta and his two cronies, the ones who always picked on Hidaka, approached him. They tossed some coins at Hidaka and ordered him to go get them some juice. Hidaka was used to being treated like an errand boy. He felt as if he were cursed with a slave's mentality, existing only to complete tasks. Hidaka was ready to do as the bullies asked, but just then, Hawauchi came up from behind and confronted them. She asked why they always chose to bully Hidaka. She asserted that in high school, society should be past the stage of bullying. Seiki denied bullying Hidaka, saying he just wanted the kid to get him some juice like any friend would. Hawauchi didn't buy their excuse, so she looked over at Hidaka, asking if he was okay with being their errand boy. Whether it was out of fear of the bullies or a desire to be accepted, Hidaka forced a smile and insisted that the guys weren't doing anything wrong, and that Hawauchi should just drop it. Hidaka had been a target of bullying his entire life, and he realized that 4 parties were involved in the process: the onlookers, the supporters, the bullies, and the victims. Everyone liked to think they weren't involved, but in the end, it was a process, and everyone played their part perfectly. Hidaka Masamune walked to the top floor of the school building. He knew they didn't sell juice up there. As he walked, Hidaka lamented how broken he was. When he reached the roof, he told himself that it wasn't him who was broken, but the world he lived in. He couldn't go on living in such a terrible world. It was a long way down, but Hidaka felt less fear and more rejection. He let himself fall. As he fell, he thought that he didn't necessarily want to die. He just couldn't bear this life anymore, and that was thanks to all the people who had made his life miserable. It was almost over. Hidaka closed his eyes and prepared to welcome death's cold embrace. On this day, did Hidaka Masamune die or not? He started to hear different voices around him, forcing him to open his eyes. Maybe this was what the afterlife looked like. He looked around and saw a man sitting on a throne who he assumed was the king. The king had several officials standing around him, who were all expressing their joy at having succeeded. But what had they succeeded in? The king cheerfully welcomed the heroes to his world, which made Hidaka look around and realize that all of his classmates were here. He didn't understand how he'd gone from falling off a building to ending up in a strange place with all of his classmates. The king introduced himself as Johannes Greyberg, the 47th king of the kingdom of Greyberg. He understood that all the newly summoned heroes would be confused about why they were here, so he offered an explanation. According to him, his kingdom had been stuck in a long war against magical beings, and the war showed no signs of stopping anytime soon. In their desperation, they had resorted to summoning heroes to see if they could break the stalemate and end the war. According to legend, summoned heroes would possess amazing skills and stats. At this point, Saiki couldn't stop himself from speaking up to the king. He questioned the king's intentions and bravely declared that they had been kidnapped by the king himself. His speech was cut short by an explosion from the king, who was trying to show the heroes what magic looked like. The king apologized, saying he thought a demonstration would be a more effective way to explain. However, this latest display only made Saiki even angrier. He almost stepped forward to confront the king directly, but someone pulled him back and told him to stop. Hidaka pointed out that the king had plenty of guards around, so they couldn't pick a fight with him. At that moment, Saiki wasn't even listening to him, but he gradually calmed down as a few other classmates shared the same sentiment. King Johannes assured the heroes that he meant them no harm. Summoning them was a difficult task, and it would make no sense to kill the very heroes they had worked so hard to summon. The king continued addressing the class, informing them that they had each received extraordinary power in their class and could access their stats just by saying status. Those with the hero class were especially blessed. Saiki was the first to call up his status window. His class was Paladin, and his title was Hero. A Paladin is ranked among the top tier of knights, possessing the attributes of a priest as well. The next person to call out his status was Ichijo Yukimura. His class was Hero, and his title was also listed as Hero. One by one, the class members checked their statuses and were all pleased with what they saw. Hidaka thought about how these people were getting another chance to enjoy an even better life. Even though they already had good lives before, now he decided to check his own stats to see if he might be one of the favored ones in this world. Hidaka accessed his status window and saw that his class was Healer, and unlike the others, his title read Reincarnated. No one else had the healer class, so he asked one of the officials, Ares, to learn more about it. Ares bluntly stated that a healer is a recovery class, the weakest among the hero classes. No one else had the healer class, so he asked one of the officials, Ares, to learn more about this class. Ares stated bluntly that a healer is a recovery class, the weakest among the hero classes. Hidaka was utterly devastated, and to make matters worse, Saiki came over to mock him. Another official asked Hidaka why his title said reincarnated instead of hero. Hidaka revealed that he had jumped off a roof right before they were summoned. The official said nothing and simply left with a questioning look on her face about his intentions. Ares began to tell the new class of heroes that they would be enrolled in a training academy for a while to become strong enough to fight magical entities. She led the class into a magic circle that would take them to the student dormitories. Saiki didn't miss the chance to mock him, continuing to taunt Hidaka about being with this weak class, even calling him a suicidal idiot. Hidaka couldn't take it anymore. He thought about how his life back home was no different from the one he was about to experience in this new world. He didn't want to be around people like Saiki anymore. Hidaka declared that he had no intention of going with them, leaving everyone stunned by his decision. Ares then revealed that, from the moment they realized he had a weak profession, they had planned to send him somewhere else. The new location would be random, and he could end up anywhere. Not even they could predict where he would go. Ares accused Hidaka of being a burden among the heroes summoned to save the people's lives, saying he was guilty of wasting their time and effort. Before Ares pushed Hidaka out of the circle, the young man cried out, vowing to destroy the entire country and every single one of them, dragging them all down to hell. It was a bold declaration from someone who was likely about to die. With that, she sent him through the circle into what she believed was his inevitable death. Sometime later, Hidaka found himself in a very dark place. He felt tired, as if he had been walking for a very long time. He remembered what led him here, the fact that he was too weak and had been cast aside. Hidaka checked his status again and noticed something interesting. He had a disorder called Otherworld Longing Syndrome, Level 1. This syndrome was a disorder suffered by those who longed for another world. After what felt like an endless walk, with a wooden torch in hand, Hidaka Masamune finally stumbled upon 3 boxes. He guessed they might be treasure chests, but he was also well aware that they could contain something dangerous. Even so, he had already walked a perilous path to near death, so he decided to open them. 3 boxes in the middle of nowhere. What could possibly go wrong? Hidaka carefully opened the first box, but was disappointed to find it empty. He decided to open all of them. Upon opening the second box, he found a small vial containing what looked like some kind of potion. He examined the vial intently, wondering if its contents might be poison. Suddenly, a voice echoed from somewhere, telling him to drink the potion. Hidaka felt a chill run down his spine and tried to pinpoint the source of the voice. The voice didn't stop. It urged him to drink every last drop if he truly wanted to become stronger. At first, Hidaka felt like he was just imagining things. But then, he thought about everything he had been through to get to this moment. He didn't want to live the same life as before, and since the world had given him another chance after he jumped, Hidaka decided that drinking this potion was a risk worth taking. He opened the vial and swallowed its entire contents. Soon after, everything went dark again as he faded into blackness. Meanwhile, the rest of the class had been transported to their new school, the Greyberg National Academy, owned by Ares Greyberg. Hawauchi stressed that Saiki should be careful around Ares, making sure not to get too involved and end up discarded. Just then, Saiki brought up the sensitive topic of Hidaka. The others criticized him for talking about Hidaka that way, but Saiki just scoffed and called them weaklings. After a while, the students present began to argue about Hidaka and who was responsible for his death. Hawauchi shut everyone down, saying that Hidaka was gone for good, and that no matter what they did or who they blamed, it wouldn't bring him back. Hidaka woke up after being unconscious for some time, his entire body aching, probably from falling on the hard floor. He realized his vision was much better, and he no longer needed the wooden torch to see. He wondered if improved eyesight was all he got from drinking the potion. Hidaka looked to his left and saw that there was still a third chest he hadn't opened. Though his expectations were low after the first 2, he decided to open the third one just to get it over with. Unfortunately, the third chest turned out to be a mimic, a dangerous creature with a long tongue and sharp teeth. The monster immediately lunged at Hidaka. He wasn't fast enough to dodge the attack, and it bit off a part of his left arm. If he hadn't run, The creature could have done even more damage. Hidaka escaped that room and ran into another one to treat himself. Even though he was a healer, he remembered he belonged to the weakest of all classes. He wondered how he could possibly win or even survive against such a terrifying monster. While checking his thoughts through his status screen, Hidaka saw something entirely new. A new skill he possessed, the enhanced mischievous reversal. This was a skill he gained by drinking the secret medicine of the god of vengeance. The effect of the enhanced mischievous reversal could be applied to any target or cancelled at will. If used on a status, plus would become minus, and if used on a life effect, it would turn into death upon appraisal. Hidaka heard a voice telling him to activate the god of vengeance's mischief, as well as the mischievous reversal skill. This meant that his recovery spell would be reversed into waves of erosion. Waves of erosion was a magical technique that originated from the user. These waves moved outward in a sphere, spreading erosion and draining the life force of anything they touched. The sphere's area of effect could be expanded depending on the user's magical power. This meant the recovery skill had now been transformed into a more destructive power. Hidaka was amazed by his new, unique skill. He wondered if it would be enough to defeat the mimic. He returned to the room and saw the mimic transforming back into a box. Hidaka was scared at first and decided that the mimic wouldn't attack if he left it alone. But as he thought about it, he remembered how the mimic had almost mangled his hand, and he suddenly felt a desire for revenge. Hidaka activated waves of erosion and aimed it at the mimic. An explosion occurred instantly, killing the monster swiftly. Hidaka couldn't believe the incredible power of his new skill. The status window announced that Divine Protection had been activated and instructed him to choose a reward from the battle. The choices included a camouflage skill that allowed for shape-shifting, a precious box with infinite storage, and a recovery potion. Although the camouflage skill sounded interesting, Hidaka felt the precious box was the most necessary item for now. The status window announced that he had just defeated a level 500 mimic and had gained enough experience to level up. The person with the weakest profession had now defeated a level 500 monster. Interestingly, he received a notification that he had leveled up, then another, and another. The notification sound kept going, making him wonder if it would ever stop. His magical techniques also leveled up, along with several other skills maxing out instantly. So much for being the weakest. After a while, the notification sound stopped, allowing Hidaka Masamune to assess his new stats. They were impressive, to say the least. He wondered if this meant he was now very strong, or if this world simply had very low standards. He also remembered that his classmates likely possessed skills just as powerful, if not more so. In the end, Hidaka decided to keep moving to see what lay ahead. He walked until he found himself in front of a very large door. Hidaka was excited by the door and wanted to see what was inside. But the door wouldn't open. Fortunately, he now had the Waves of Erosion skill. With that skill, he easily broke down the door and stepped inside. Inside the large room, he saw a staff floating in midair without any support. It reminded him of the fantasy games he used to play. Feeling the staff would be a useful addition to his collection, he decided to approach it. He had only taken a few steps when the ground began to shake, almost like an earthquake. No, it wasn't an earthquake, but another creature in the room. Hidaka saw a giant armored knight. It must be the guardian of the staff. The guardian looked aggressive, immediately swinging its longsword toward Hidaka. Fortunately, Hidaka's defense and resistance had doubled at the last minute, allowing him to dodge the attack. However, he felt the force of the blow and didn't want to imagine the damage he would have taken if it had connected. The guardian didn't attack immediately, and Hidaka noticed it was still struggling to pull its sword from the ground. This was an opportunity he couldn't miss. Hidaka immediately activated Waves of Erosion and aimed it at the guardian. The guardian fell back and lay motionless, making Hidaka certain of his victory. Seriously, Waves of Erosion was like a cheat code. Hidaka was overjoyed, but he didn't notice the guardian's giant leg approaching from behind. The guardian's kick sent Hidaka crashing into the wall in pain. If he hadn't raised his defense earlier, he would have been in serious trouble. Hidaka quickly recovered and prepared for the next attack. Fortunately, the guardian was off balance with only its leg on the ground, giving Hidaka time to make another move. He used Waves of Erosion again, but this time, he focused all his power into the attack. The continuous waves were too much for it to handle, and finally, the attack split the guardian in two. His victory was confirmed. This time, he received a skill from his latest victory, Mimic's Life, a skill unique to high-level mimics which allowed him to create information displays on the status screen. Hidaka also received a high-level sword and shield. The status window confirmed his victory against the level 400 giant mimic and announced he had leveled up. His new level on the status screen read 2120. However, Hidaka refused to get carried away, especially since his magic skills were only at level 5. He also received additional motivation from Ares and the bullies, something that would surely never fade from his mind. Hidaka Masamune finally took the floating staff. The status window informed him that he had just obtained a magic tool, Saint's Wrath, a staff containing intermediate level holy magic of the light element. Although he didn't fully understand what that meant, Hidaka felt he might need it in the future, so he stored it in his precious chest and continued on his journey. After all, he was just getting started. At the upper training grounds of Greyberg Academy, the students were deep in their training sessions. Ichijo, however, was struggling, especially after a failed attempt to create a magic circle. The instructor in charge of the training session, Philip Battler, stepped in to offer some advice. He explained that the magic circle had exploded because it was unstable, and advised Ichijo to focus more. Philip also mentioned that Ichijo's explosive magic was extremely powerful, which made controlling it a challenge. However, he encouraged him to learn how to manage his power without relying on circles and spells. Otherwise, he wouldn't stand a chance against the demons. Saiki and Ichijo, who seemed to be resting under a tree, started talking about the instructor's criticism that their magical abilities were subpar, and that without enough magical power, their spells would be meaningless. Saiki started criticizing Ichijo, finding it absurd that even though he was the only one currently able to use magic, he quickly grew tired and lost all his courage, yet he still proudly called himself a hero. Saiki believed that being labeled a hero and actually being worthy of the title were completely different things. To him, these titles were just ornaments. Ichijo, on the other hand, believed that no matter how much they desired it, changing their status was not an easy task. In a distant labyrinth, Hidaka stumbled upon a bottle of wine and some food in a food storage. It was a lucky find, and he quickly realized it was his first time tasting wine. To his surprise, it was quite pleasant. Curiosity led him to a huge door, urging him to explore the mysteries within. As he entered, he was greeted by a peculiar figure sitting on a throne. This person began a conversation with a one-eyed flying creature named Zuri, asking about the last time an adventurer had passed this way. Zuri replied that 150 years had passed. The man couldn't help but be surprised to realize he had been sitting there for such a long time. He rose from his throne and introduced himself to Hidaka as Sean, the Serpent King. He suggested they begin their battle, but in the middle of his speech, like a sudden flash of lightning, he appeared right in front of Hidaka, stopping him in his tracks. Hidaka didn't have time to understand what was happening, only realizing it when he felt a pain in his abdomen. Shion expressed his disappointment having waited 150 years to face an adventurer, wondering just how much the quality of adventurers had declined. He asked Hidaka if he was a priest, thinking that might explain why Hidaka couldn't perceive his movements. However, Zuri clarified that Hidaka was actually a healer. Shion was astonished, wondering how a healer could have reached this place alone. Zuri tried to hint to Sean that there was something special about Hidaka's skills, but before it could finish, Hidaka quickly gripped his staff and activated a holy light. He aimed at Zuri and destroyed it to pieces. Shion became enraged with Hidaka for destroying his loyal companion and lunged toward him. However, Hidaka unleashed his erosion wave skill, directing it at Shion. Fortunately, Shion managed to dodge a fatal blow, but the skill still took its toll, breaking his sword into 2 pieces. Shion felt even more despair as he realized both his sword and his loyal companion had been heavily damaged. Hidaka asked why he was making such a fuss over a simple sword, but before he could say more, Shion quickly slashed at him. In a fit of rage, Shion demanded to know why Hidaka dared to mock him after killing Zuri and breaking his sword. He warned that he wouldn't let him leave alive. Hidaka immediately began to heal himself, annoyed that Shion was so fast he couldn't see his attacks. Shion wondered if the magic that killed Zuri had come from Hidaka's staff, but he also noticed that the spell Hidaka had just used showed no signs of being item-assisted. Finally, Shion asked Hidaka who he was. Hidaka responded by declaring that he was a healer, just as Zuri, the one-eyed monster, had mentioned earlier. Shion, who didn't believe what he was hearing, decided to slash Hidaka repeatedly until he finally revealed the truth. According to Shion, Zuri had informed him that Hidaka was very strange, but Hidaka had chosen to silence Zuri to prevent it from revealing his secret. Shion found it hard to accept that a healer could use attack magic, implying that Hidaka was hiding something. Despite enduring numerous slashes, Hidaka continued to insist he was a healer. Sean grew even more furious when Hidaka refused to reveal his name, instead just repeating his profession. Hidaka began to recall being bullied as a child, and strangely, he started to think that being called a NEET was better than being labeled a low-class healer. With newfound determination, he decided to reveal to Shaon that his name was now N-E-E-T. Hidaka resolutely accepted this name and became determined to make it famous, with the goal of getting revenge on those who had once looked down on him. Shaon found the name amusing and even playfully mispronounced it, but he persisted in asking what Hidaka truly was. Hidaka was unwavering, still insisting he was a healer. Shaon, fed up with Hidaka's game, decided to take a more ruthless approach, slashing at him with all his might. After Hidaka fell to the ground, Shaon prepared to deliver a final blow to finish him off. However, in a surprising turn of events, Hidaka managed to unleash a powerful erosion wave at the last second, finally defeating Shaon. In his final words before dying, Shaon advised Hidaka to keep his true identity a secret. Hidaka was surprised, wondering what he meant by that. Shaon explained that despite possessing extraordinary magical power with unique traits, the healer class was considered low rank. If news of Hidaka's abilities were to spread, he would become a target for others. People generally expect those in low-ranking classes to be weak, so concealing his true identity was the wiser choice. Hidaka moved closer to Shaon, asking if he could ask a question. Shaon agreed as a reward for Hidaka having defeated him. Hidaka asked if Shaon knew someone called the God of Vengeance. Shaon was taken aback by the name and had a sudden flashback to a conversation with an old friend who once said he wanted to start using the title God of Vengeance. With a smile, Shaon finally understood everything. He informed Hidaka that it had been quite a while since he'd last heard that name, mentioning it was the nickname of a cursed adventurer. Shaon then advised Hidaka to journey to distant lands, assuring him that one day he would grasp the true meaning of everything. Shaon asked for Hidaka's real name, surprising him by revealing that he had seen through his alias, Neat. Hidaka honestly revealed his real name, but when he asked Shaon about the reason for his strange actions earlier, he realized that Shaon had already passed away. Suddenly, the sword Shaon's serpent appeared before Hidaka, and he received a notification that he now possessed it. Hidaka wondered if a healer like him could even use such a weapon, but he ultimately decided to accept it as a reward for defeating Zuri. Hidaka also received the skill Magic Eye of the Truth, and, in a surprising turn of events, he inherited the speed skill as a reward for defeating Shaon. Magic Eye of the Truth was a skill that allowed him to secretly appraise another person's status without their permission or knowledge. After defeating Shaon, Hidaka wandered through the labyrinth and stumbled upon an endless staircase. On his way up, he would take a sip from a bottle of liquor, get drunk, then use his Cure Abnormal Status skill to sober up, repeating the cycle just to kill time as he continued to climb. Suddenly, he heard a voice from behind, and what happened next truly surprised him. When he turned to face the voice, he found himself standing in the middle of a forest, completely bewildered. He wondered what had just happened, as he was certain that just a moment ago he was on those stairs. He began to think he might have been transported again, as the feeling was similar to when he first arrived in this strange world. But he decided to stop worrying about it, and was just happy to be out of the labyrinth. He resolved to continue his adventure elsewhere. Suddenly, he heard the same female voice as before he was transported. He turned around and saw 3 people not far away. 2 of them, a boy and a girl, were arguing, while the other, a black-haired boy holding a long katana, was staring intently at Hidaka, while the other 2 were still bickering. Hidaka just looked at them expressionlessly, wondering if they were even human. Then, the girl asked her friends about Hidaka's identity. The black-haired boy stepped out of the bushes and said it didn't matter who Hidaka was because he had likely been eavesdropping on them, so they needed to deal with him immediately. Hidaka panicked when he heard the threat to end his life. He tried to reason with the black-haired boy, asking him to lower his weapon so they could talk. But without listening, the black-haired boy lunged towards Hidaka, trying to strike him down with blinding speed. To the boy's surprise, in the blink of an eye, Hidaka was suddenly behind his female companion, holding a sword to her neck and telling him not to move. The other boy was terrified and shouted the girl's name, calling her Eliza. The black-haired boy turned around and asked Hidaka how he managed to get past him, but Hidaka pleaded with him not to move. Hidaka demanded that both boys put their swords down. Eliza the girl called the black-haired boy Jeek and begged him to lower his weapon, saying that they had already lost. Finally, Jeek agreed and stuck his sword in the ground, telling Hidaka to let Eliza go. Hidaka suspected it might be a trap, but Jeek promised he wouldn't fight anymore. Hidaka decided to trust them and handed Eliza over to the other boy, Alfred. He sheathed his sword and left without delay. Unexpectedly, Jeek begged him to wait a moment. With a hint of arrogance, Hidaka asked why, when just a few minutes ago they were all trying to kill him. Jeek introduced himself and explained to Hidaka that he needed his help. Unexpectedly, Jeek invited Hidaka to join them. However, Hidaka flatly refused and started to walk away, saying it sounded like a troublesome situation and advised them to find help elsewhere. But as he was walking away, he suddenly realized that a barrage of fireballs was being launched at him from behind. Hidaka managed to dodge the fire attack and asked Jeek if he had lost his mind. In response, Jeek calmly stated that he was perfectly composed while summoning a powerful fire hammer spell. As Hidaka had climbed the stairs, he couldn't help but recall how he had used a cunning reversal technique on all of his spells. This was the opposite of the soul-destroying attribute. He realized that due to a lack of information on the range and scale of the skill's effect on magic, he wouldn't fully understand it until he tested it in a real battle. So he had chosen to keep the skill in his storage. However, he now reasoned that since the fire hammer was relatively small in scale, this was the perfect opportunity for him to test the skill. When the flames were just inches away, Hidaka activated a special move, Soul Break, instantly shattering Jeek's magic circle. Jeek was surprised to see his magic circle collapse so easily and began to wonder if Hidaka was some kind of monster. Hidaka prepared to counterattack Jeek, but suddenly Eliza grabbed his hand and begged him for forgiveness and to spare Jeek. Even though Jeek was the one in the wrong, Hidaka realized that this situation was making him just like his bullies. So he decided to let it go, determined not to become someone like Psyche. As he started to walk away, Jeek stopped him and asked if he wanted to become their teammate. Jeek confessed that from the very beginning, he had sensed that Hidaka was no ordinary person, which was why he had tested him, believing Hidaka could dodge his attacks. Jeek explained to Hidaka that they were looking for a strong ally, as they were part of a special group, and that's why they needed someone as strong as him. Hidaka felt his curiosity piqued and asked what was in it for him. Jeek replied frankly that they were willing to grant him anything he desired. However, Hidaka refused the offer, saying he didn't really need anything, and even if he did, they couldn't provide what he truly wanted. Eliza tried to convince Jeek not to recruit Hidaka, but Jeek stressed the urgency and the need for a strong person for their mission. In the end, Jeek made a crucial decision, giving Hidaka a ring. He explained that it was a communication device, and if Hidaka channeled his magical energy into it, he could communicate with others from a distance. Jeek pleaded with Hidaka to think carefully about the offer, then went on to explain that their group was called Dragon's Heart, and their mission was to eliminate corruption and bring peace to the world. After thinking for a moment, Hidaka agreed to take the ring. He summoned his spatial storage and placed it inside. Alfred was astonished to see this skill, and Hidaka asked if it was rare. Alfred said that this was the first time he had ever seen it in his life. Jeek informed Hidaka that they were on their way to Grey Belka, because a month ago, that country had summoned heroes, so they were going to investigate the incident. Hidaka couldn't believe his ears when he heard this, because as far as he knew, only a few days had passed since he arrived here. Jeek asked him where he was going, and Hidaka replied that he was just heading to town. Eliza then mentioned that it would take 3 days to walk to the town, and only then did she remember to ask his name. Hidaka realized that since they were heading to Grey Belka, using his real name wouldn't be safe. Instead, from now on, he decided to adopt a new alias, Nito. So he introduced himself by his new name, Nito, while wandering in the forest. Nito encountered a pack of wolves and decided to test his skills. However, just before he could act, a voice warned him to hide. Suddenly, a girl with a sword appeared and quickly defeated the entire pack of wolves. She thought Nito was in danger and decided to save him. She checked to see if he was okay, and Nito awkwardly replied that he was fine. Nito thanked the girl for saving him, saying he thought he was a goner. Using his appraisal skill, he discovered that her name was Sierra, a Carlite, and a Knight of the White King. Sierra suddenly got closer to him, saying that he didn't seem very happy that she had helped him. Suddenly, a carriage approached them. A voice called out to Sierra, and as the carriage drew near, a man stepped out and introduced himself as William Vector, while also introducing his bodyguard, Keith. Sierra told Nito her name, and Nito did the same with a confused look on his face. She told Nito that his name sounded strange. Afterwards, the carriage continued on through the forest, now with Nito inside. William informed them that they were transporting goods to Razhausen. He explained that since he and Sierra knew each other, he had offered her a ride to Razhausen in exchange for her protection during the journey. Nito apologized for bothering them, but William dismissed it, saying you can never have enough guards on the road. He recalled how Sierra had jumped out of the carriage the moment she sensed a presence, and that such an action was normal for her, although it had surprised him a little. He also expressed how lucky he was to see one of the White King's knights in action. Sierra blushed, insisting that it was nothing special. Nito then asked who the White King's knights were. Sierra was surprised that he didn't know about them, explaining that Razhausen, the royal capital, has been ruled by a king named Arnold Razhausen for generations. She explained that the people who work under him are known as the White King's Knights. William chimed in, saying that wasn't entirely certain, since the White King's Knights rarely ever appear, and seeing one of them in a place like this was practically a miracle. Flattered, Sierra said that he was exaggerating things. Nito, however, silently agreed, thinking that he never expected to see such a beautiful silver-haired girl, and believing she must be the heroine of this world. Sierra then told William that he was quite famous himself, but William humbly denied it. She went on to say that there wasn't a single person in the merchant trade who didn't know of him, and that he was widely known for dealing in rare and valuable items. Nito realized that was why William needed protection. William bowed his head in thanks and said he was unworthy of such praise. William then asked Nito what he was doing in such a remote place, and Nito replied that he just wanted to go on an adventure. William then asked Nito if he was heading to the guild. At first, Nito was confused but quickly realized that guilds existed in this world, a classic destination for someone from another world. He then lied, saying he was on his way there. Sierra offered to show him the way when they arrived. She asked Nito about his class, and Nito was surprised that she asked him so casually. He considered lying to her, as he'd always been advised to keep his identity a secret, but in the end, he decided to tell the truth. He was a healer. Hearing this, Sierra asked in surprise if he planned on joining a party, and Nito said that he intended to if he could find the right one. Sierra then offered to help him ask around at the guild. She warned that being a healer was a difficult class for an adventurer, but still assured him that he would find someone to team up with. Beginning to smile, Nito promised to do his best, energized by Sierra's optimism. Sierra then told Nito that since he couldn't use offensive magic, it would be best for him to learn how to use a weapon or two. This information took Nito by surprise, as he couldn't believe that he could use weapons even as a healer. He asked Sierra if he could use fireballs or lightning. She replied that it would be difficult for him, as healers and sorcerers have different magical natures. Nito then asked if he could do it using attribute enhancement, and Sierra explained that attribute enhancement and magical attributes are different. Attribute enhancement is a support spell that can only be applied to weapons. As she continued to explain, Nito listened in silence, finding it difficult to understand everything. Sierra then said that even so, it was rare for a healer to possess attribute enhancement magic, which was all the more reason for him to learn swordsmanship. Nito decided he would try to learn it, and Sierra cheerfully promised to teach him later. The carriage finally arrived at Tanya village, and the group decided to take a rest. As they stepped out of the carriage, they saw a crowd gathered around the entrance of a building. Curious, they asked what had happened, and the crowd parted to reveal an elderly man sitting with several others. The man asked the travelers who they were, and after a few minutes of explanation, he understood and apologized, saying the village was currently in no condition to welcome guests. The elderly man then explained that their village had been attacked by bandits, and all the women in the village had been taken away. The surrounding men angrily shouted that they had gathered to get their women back, insisting that they couldn't just sit by and let this happen. Sierra then told the men that bandits and gangs operate differently, and that most bandits are connected to slavers. She added that while they should rescue the women as soon as possible, she suggested that her group go in their place. At first, the elderly man tried to stop them, but William told him not to worry and to let them handle this. He then told Sierra to bring Heath along, saying he would be able to help. Sierra asked if anyone knew where the bandits might have gone. At first, everyone was silent, but then a young boy named Jack stepped forward, saying he had followed the bandits and found their camp after climbing a mountain, where he saw his mother and the other villagers locked in cages. He volunteered to help, saying he wanted to save his mother and the others. Later, they arrived at the camp and hid in the nearby bushes. Sierra told Jack to go back to the village and wait there, while the bandits chatted amongst themselves and the women in the cages waited in despair. Nito couldn't help but feel like he was taking part in a game event. Sierra told Jack that she and Keith would take care of the guards around the area and would signal him when everything was ready. She told them to stay put and just focus on providing support. Nito thought to himself that staying back was unavoidable since he was a healer. He decided to stay out of the way for now and witness the power of the White Kingdom's knights. Back in the village, the old man continued to worry about their safety. William continued to reassure everyone that they would be fine, since Keith was with them. He also added that even though Sierra was young, she was still one of the White Kingdom's knights. Meanwhile, on the mountain, Sierra plunged a sword into a bandit's chest. He fell to the ground, dying instantly. Afterwards, Keith and Nito began to pile up the bodies of the other 3 bandits. Nito praised Sierra's fighting style, but she humbly replied that it was nothing special. They freed all the women from the cages, and Sierra announced that they would be returning to the village, reminding everyone to follow quietly. Sierra was thankful that most of the bandits weren't present, but Nito couldn't help but feel that everything was too easy. As they were preparing to leave, a man in a black robe, along with a few others, approached and asked where they thought they were going. Sierra readied herself, unsurprised to learn that the mission wouldn't be so easy. The man agreed with her, saying that no one would let their merchandise be taken so easily. Nito then deduced that this was actually a trap from the start. Sierra finally realized he was Oliver Joe, a former knight of Reshausen and the captain of the Ash Gang. 2 years ago, he had suddenly slaughtered all his men, burned the city to the ground, and vanished. Oliver bowed and cheerfully thanked her for the introduction. She asked why someone as capable as him would get involved in thievery, and he replied that he hated the idea of being loyal to a country or a king and despised being used by them. She said that the current king is a generous man, but he shot back, asking what would happen if the king's orders were absolute. That question made Sierra freeze in fear. Oliver continued, saying her eyes were just like those of the people he'd killed, but he wouldn't kill her because as a beautiful woman she would fetch a good price. He sensed someone pursuing them and ordered his men to kill only the men. Sierra told Nito to get everyone and run. She used her Ice Windstorm skill to take down most of Oliver's subordinates. Oliver clapped, saying he expected nothing less from a knight of the White King. Meanwhile, another subordinate charged towards Nito and the women, but Keith quickly intervened and killed him with a masterful strike. He calmly encouraged Sierra to keep her spirits up. Nito, on the other hand, was ecstatic over Keith's skill, amazed that such a thing was possible for an attack class. While Oliver sighed, annoyed that the bandits were so weak, he claimed that he was suffering from his subordinates' incompetence. Just as Sierra finished off the last bandit, she suddenly heard a cry for help. One of the women screamed for Jack, who was now being held tightly by Oliver. Jack cried out for his mother, but Oliver yelled at him to shut up. Sierra, confused, couldn't understand why Jack was with him. Oliver explained that he'd taken the opportunity to grab the boy when he was alone on his way to the village. Only a fool would leave a child alone in enemy territory, he said, questioning Sierra's competence. Are you really a knight of the White Kingdom? Jack kept crying for Sierra and his mother, but Oliver pulled his hair, screaming at him to be quiet. He pulled a knife from his back pocket and stabbed it straight toward Jack's neck. But in the blink of an eye, Nito appeared behind him, Oliver's knife now in Nito's hand. Nito plunged the blade into the bandit's neck, and moments later, Oliver fell to the ground, dead. Everyone around them was stunned by what had just happened, a palpable tension filling the air. Nito, trying to break the tense atmosphere, suggested they should head back, since the village was probably worried about them. Meanwhile, Keith just quietly took in everything that had just happened. Sierra demanded Nito explain how he was able to do that, even offering to check his status. Nito just pointed out that they should return to the village first. Sierra relented, saying he would explain it to her once they got back. As they walked back to the village, Nito complimented Keith's magic, but Keith just smiled and said it was nothing compared to what Nito had just done. Nito realized he had no allies in this argument and started thinking about Cheon's advice, that his actions were the right thing to do since Jack would have died if he hadn't intervened. Upon returning to the village, the men enthusiastically welcomed back the women and the heroes, the air filled with joy. Nito looked around, happy at the sight. Suddenly, he noticed a cloaked girl standing by a warehouse, completely alone. Nito tried to talk to her, but the girl ignored him. The girl said she wasn't from the village and had been in the cage when they were brought here. Sierra approached and also tried to talk to her, promising to take care of her and send a request to the town council to get her back to her hometown. Still no response. Nito spoke to her again, saying she could go back any time, but if she didn't know the way, he could take her there if she wanted. At first, Sierra told him he should be gentler, but then the girl lightly tugged on Nito's cloak. Nito told the girl she was embarrassing him, and she suddenly spoke up, saying that she didn't like him. This surprised Nito, and he asked why she hadn't said so sooner. The girl took off her cloak and introduced herself as Totrika, but said he could call her Toa. Nito then introduced himself. At first he tried to say his name was Nito, but for some reason he decided to tell her his real name was Masamune. However, he quickly asked her to call him Nito in front of other people, and she agreed. Nito asked her how she got captured, but she explained that she didn't know, and when she woke up she was already in the forest. He asked where her home was, but she didn't know that either. Nito decided they would just have to try and find To's hometown. Meanwhile, back at the carriage, William asked Keith about the outcome of the encounter and his impression of Sierra. Keith said that, just as he'd mentioned, her swordsmanship was amazing and her killing intent was also excellent. William then said that Nito would have a hard time and that a difficult road lay ahead of him. However, Keith disagreed, saying that it wouldn't be a problem and that Nito was truly a monster. William felt both worried and curious hearing Keith speak about Nito that way. The party finally left Tanya village early in the morning and continued their journey to Rizaz. On the way, Sierra reminded Nito that he still hadn't explained how he was able to defeat Oliver despite being a healer. She said she wouldn't rest until he gave her a satisfactory answer. She even began to doubt whether he was really a healer at all. Nito then showed Sierra his status, explaining that he had used the Godspeed skill to move quickly and retrieve the knife. Satisfied with the explanation, Sierra apologized for doubting him, but Nito replied that it was fine as long as she understood. He silently gave thanks for having learned the Mimic's life skill. William then announced that they were close to Rizaz. When they got out of the carriage, they saw a city surrounded by a huge wall that stretched as far as the eye could see. Nito gazed at the city in awe. Once they were inside, William said his goodbyes, hoping to see them again sometime. Nito, Sierra, and Toa thanked him for the ride and headed for the guild. When they arrived, Sierra led him to a crystal orb, which was used to check one's status for registration. As he placed his hand on the orb, Nito used his Mimic's life skill again and created a fake status for himself. Sierra then asked him what he planned to do now that he was registered. Nito turned to Toa and asked if she wanted to go to the city hall to look for clues about her hometown. Toa looked away, saying she could do it later. Nito noticed that Toa didn't seem very eager to find her home. He then asked if she wanted to register as an adventurer, and she immediately agreed. Suddenly, a burly man placed a hand on Nito's shoulder, saying he was jealous that Nito had two beautiful girls with him. He asked if Nito would mind sharing them with his friends. With an awkward smile, Nito apologized to the man, saying they were both his friends. The man's expression immediately turned serious, telling Nito he was ordering him to leave them be. He stressed that being an adventurer would be too hard for him since he was a healer, and that it would be best for him to just go home. Toa told the man he was being rude. He turned to her and said she should leave Nito and join him and his friends, promising it would be fun. Suddenly, some knights burst into the guild looking for Sierra. One of them, Annette, knelt before Sierra, overjoyed that she had returned to the capital safely. Looking over at Nito and Toa, she asked who they were and wondered if she was interrupting something. Sierra introduced Nito and Toa to Annette, who thanked them for taking care of Sierra and invited them to come to the castle. Frustrated, the man finally spoke up, grabbing Sierra's cloak and yelling that she shouldn't ignore him while he was talking. Annette immediately grabbed him and pinned him to the ground, calling him a brute and asking if he had any idea who he was touching. Nito was surprised to see that the man was an adventurer, especially since he seemed so weak after being taken down. Sierra said goodbye to Nito and asked Toa if she still didn't want to go to the city hall. Toa confirmed she didn't, and hearing that, Sierra decided not to press the issue and said they could come to the Eckerlat house if any problems came up. After Sierra left, Nito wondered what to do now. He realized he didn't have any money. A woman suddenly approached them, saying they had strange outfits. She invited them into her shop and offered to trade some of their old clothes for new ones. She gave Nito a new set of clothes, and when she learned that he was a healer, she also gave him a pouch for carrying herbs. She explained that healers can only use weak healing magic, so they need as many healing items as they can get. After that, she asked Toa about her class, and Toa replied that she was a paladin. Nito was confused, so the woman explained that paladins are also known as magic knights. or the only class capable of using magic in their swordsmanship. Upon checking To's status, they discovered that she was a demon. Once again, Nito was confused, and the woman explained that demons are a race said to live on the other side of the Great Forest, and are always born with high magical power. She then asked the two about their relationship, and Nito shyly told her that it was a strange combination. Afterward, the two changed into new clothes, and the woman also gave To a broadsword, and even gave them a small bag of money. She told Nito that although the people in Rajazan accept demons, there are still some who discriminate against them. She also added that because demons have high magical power, they easily attract the attention of kidnappers, so she asked Nito to protect Toa. Nito promised he would as they left. The woman introduced herself as Sharon and told them to come back whenever they needed anything else. Later, as they were having a drink outside, Nito asked if she could see his true status with her divine demonic eye skill, and she confirmed it. He went on to ask what she thought when she saw it, and she replied that other than finding it unusual, she didn't think much else of it. Nito then asked why she was captured by the bandits even though she was stronger than them. She answered that she was scared. He asked where she was before entering the forest, and she revealed that she was in a castle, which shocked Nito. He started to theorize that she might be a princess from a royal family, assuming demons had a social hierarchy. Confused, he asked her what she did at the castle, and she replied that she didn't do anything special, because in the morning she had magic and sword training, and in the evening she would wait for her parents or her older sister to come home. While waiting, she would sometimes play in the treasure room or chat with the pixies in the garden. Nito suddenly realized that since she wasn't allowed outside since she was little, she had never been outside the castle walls. She was just like him, experiencing the world for the first time. Nito and To went into the forest to defeat goblins and collect their fangs to pay for their lodging. Curious, Nito wondered if goblins turned into corpses when they died, as he believed mimics disappeared after death. To clarified that only mimics in dungeons disappear, while goblins do not. She added that goblins are monsters, not mimics. Nito, confused, asked about their differences. Toa explained that mimics are intelligent and can speak human language, while monsters are completely different. Nito quickly realized that Zuri wasn't a monster as he had thought, but was actually a mimic. Afterward, Nito and To returned to the guild to sell the goblin fangs. Noticing To yawn, Nito thought she must be tired after a day's work, so he suggested finding a fun activity. The receptionist gave them a map and suggested a free room at an inn for the night. Suddenly, an arrogant man approached from behind, curious about To's name. Nito stepped forward, warning the man that To was with him. The man, not recognizing Nito, asked if he was an adventurer, and Nito confirmed it. The man then told Nito it was no surprise he didn't recognize him, but then he started belittling Nito for taking on a goblin-slaying quest. Nito felt hurt, but tried to hide it by politely trying to end the conversation. However, as they turned to leave, the man mocked that low-rank quests don't pay well. Nito once again remained polite, reassuring the man that they didn't need to worry about their finances. However, the man rudely cut him off, telling Nito to shut up because he was talking to the girl beside him, not to him. The man tried to impress To by suggesting that if she joined him, he could conquer challenging quests like hunting boar wolves, giant snakes, and even grizzleheads. Finally, he admitted to witnessing Nito's argument with someone else earlier, and knew that Nito was a healer. The arrogant man taunted Nito, implying his journey might be cut short, and that he'd probably end up in a cheap inn that night. He uncomfortably patted To on the shoulder and implied that if she went with him, he could offer her much more satisfaction than Nito ever could. Nito realized the man had ulterior motives and decided it wasn't worth arguing with him. Instead, he suggested to Toa that they should leave, but Toa seemed unwilling to back down. Nito tried to get her attention, but she ignored him and used a powerful lightning spell to take the man down, surprising everyone in the guild. Nito took her hand and they quickly left the guild. As they walked, To was still angry and started to walk faster than Nito. He repeatedly asked her to slow down a bit. At first, she ignored him, but eventually she stopped and emotionally asked him why he didn't say anything to the man, especially when he was strong enough to defend himself. Nito sighed and explained to her that his strength made him believe the man wasn't worth his attention. So he decided to ignore him to avoid causing a scene. Nito noticed Toa starting to clench her fist in frustration and anger. He realized that he also felt angry at the man, but thought it was best not to express it directly. However, he was shocked to see To's tears, since they had only just met and didn't even know each other that well. Nito apologized to Toa and admitted that he had considered physically confronting the man. He also thanked her for being angry on his behalf and promised to stand up for himself next time. However, he understood that in this world, healers aren't expected to be strong, so he would try to handle things without causing a big commotion. Toa stopped crying and told him she understood. She affectionately reassured him that she was willing to be angry for him. Nito and Toa enjoyed a delicious meal they had earned from a stonewall monster. Nito was quite sure that Toa must have enjoyed this dish many times before, but to his surprise, she confessed that she never had. Nito found it puzzling, thinking their meal was fit for royalty, and he wondered how Toa had never experienced such delicious meat. In response, Toa shared that her food choices had always revolved around meals prepared just for her. She needed food to enhance her magical abilities, so her previous culinary experiences were very different. Nito gradually realized that the more time he spent with Toa, the more interesting she became. He decided it would be a good idea for them to take on a reconnaissance mission in the Monsterlands, as it was likely Toa's homeland. Toa took another spoonful and commented that this meal would surely boost her power more than any before. She was so impressed by the prospect of the rewards from this delicious meal that she was willing to repeat the experience many times. Nito was glad to see the meal had cheered Toa up. He suggested that they take on another quest the next day to seek an even bigger reward. Toa readily agreed to the proposal. After their meal, Nito and Toa booked a room at a popular inn, with comfortable beds and a pleasant bath. They were lucky to get into such a busy inn. Nito suggested that he would sleep on the floor so Toa could have the bed, but Toa proposed a better idea. They could lie on either side of the bed, as it was big enough for both of them, and he would catch a cold if he slept on the floor. Nito expressed that he wasn't a quiet sleeper, often tossing and turning all night, but Toa decided not to mind and called him by his real name, Masamune. This caught Nito off guard, leaving him flustered. Toa had already laid down on the bed and asked Nito if he wasn't going to join her. Not wanting to further address the statement that had shocked him, Nito decided to climb into bed beside her, while Toa seemed to be fast asleep. Nito felt restless. Toa called out to him, asking if he was asleep yet. He admitted he was far from it. Toa revealed that she had always been alone in the castle. Her parents often returned late at night, and her sister was always busy. Her only friends were the pixies, and she often felt lonely. At this moment, with Nito by her side, Toa no longer felt alone. She warmly wished Nito good night, pulling closer to snuggle up to him. That simple yet affectionate gesture made Nito relax, and he finally drifted into a peaceful sleep. The next day, they had a visitor knocking at their door. Nito, still sleepy, opened it and said it was too early for visitors. The visitor was none other than Sierra, who said it was already noon and that she had come to teach Naito swordsmanship. The conversation woke Toa up, who asked what all the noise was about. Sierra was surprised to see Toei there, dressed provocatively, and was immediately drawn into a fiery argument between the two girls. Sierra apologized for her actions during lunch, saying she was sorry for jumping to conclusions and attacking Nito, which was incomprehensible for her as a white knight. Nito quickly brushed it off. Sierra mentioned hearing Toa called Nito Masamune, and she was able to piece together that Nito was an alias. Nito begged her to keep this a secret, while making a mental note that he needed to be more careful about Toa using that name, as he didn't want it to become public knowledge. Sierra asked if Masamune was his name from the country of Gikoku. Gikoku is a nation across the sea from the continent of Venom, and its residents often use names similar to Nito's. Nito made a mental note that he needed to gather more information about this country. Sierra again brought up the possibility of teaching Nito's swordsmanship, and Nito expressed his interest. Nito planned to accept a quest from the guild today, as he needed money. Sierra asked if she could come along, promising that with her help, they would be able to take on high-reward quests. The deal for high-reward quests was settled. They arrived at the guild and were informed that there were ranks for adventurers based on their achievements. The lowest rank was F, and the highest was SSS. Toa and Nito currently qualified for E-rank quests, but Sierra's presence gave them an advantage, bumping them up to D-rank quests or even higher. Nito asked Sierra if she was also an adventurer, and she replied that before she swore her service to the country, she had also taken on requests from the guild. This was mandatory for knights serving the nation, so technically all knights were adventurers. Nito still seemed worried, asking if it was all right for Sierra to show up at the guild 2 days in a row, as it was generally believed that white knights shouldn't make public appearances. She brushed it off, saying she knew how to blend in and tone it down. Besides, she was entering the guild as a knight, not an adventurer. They discussed what kind of request to take. considering that everything on the list was feasible for Nito. He scanned the notices and pointed to one with a monster he could identify. Sierra explained that this monster was called a Kalane, a giant two-horned beast that lived in the forest. Nito suggested they take on the Kalane challenge. After completing the necessary procedures with the receptionist, Sierra asked if they could visit the shop for a bit. The group unanimously agreed. They arrived at Sharon's shop, and Sharon happened to know Sierra, asking her if she was on her day off. Sierra said yes and announced that they had a mission to slay a Kalane, so they were thinking of stocking up on Catherine medicine. Nito, ever curious, asked what that was, and Sharon explained that it was a hearing protection drug. As it turned out, a Kalane's cry could paralyze its victim's body, so having this medicine was crucial. Sharon remembered Nito as the healer who had visited her shop before. Upon closer inspection, she also revealed that Toa was a paladin. Sierra was surprised to hear this and expressed her disbelief, repeatedly mentioning it even as they approached the Grill Forest. Apparently, only one person in the entire country possessed the paladin class, and it was an extremely rare class, even among the Knights of the White Kingdom. Anyone would be surprised to learn that Toa was a paladin. Nito argued that if this information was so sensitive, it would be best for Sierra to keep that secret to herself. Inwardly, he felt he was in trouble. What if Sierra accidentally let his real name slip to someone? She had just barely managed to keep the secret about the paladin. As they emerged from the forest, a group of people caught Sierra's attention, prompting her to ask about their experience. They began to recount their adventure in the woods, sharing that things were going smoothly at first as they were searching for orcs. However, their journey took a disturbing turn when they witnessed orcs, goblins, and wolves fleeing in a state of panic. Despite some hesitation, they decided to stay and witness the appearance of a Kalane. What struck them as odd was that this Kalane looked rather unusual. One member of the group confidently stated that he was familiar with the appearance of a typical Kalane, but this one was different, leaving them puzzled. Sierra asked if the Kalane they saw was covered in particles of light, and they agreed that it was. Just then, they heard a terrifying sound that sent birds scattering into the air. A huge Kalane stepped out, and the group that had just left the forest admitted that the Kalane must have followed their trail. Sierra confidently switched into hero mode, assuring everyone that she and her team would handle the situation. Meanwhile, Nito was briefly captivated by the giant beast, prompting Sierra to gently inform him that he was looking at a fearsome creature known as a Kalane. Similar to adventurers, monsters are also ranked based on the difficulty they pose. Defeating a Kalane is considered a formidable A-rank challenge, even though the Kalane itself is a B-rank creature. However, in practice, they are often treated as A-rank creatures due to their ferocious nature and bizarre cries. In other words, a request to deal with a Kalane was a dangerous mission. After the quick lecture, Sierra asked if Nito and Toa were okay, and they both said yes. For Sierra, the monster's voice affected the flow of her mana. She recalled seeing Nito in action and wondered if, should things go wrong, she could rely on him. Nito declared that he could handle it. He checked the monster's status bar and saw that it was level 32, which he decided wasn't too difficult to handle. The strategy was for Toe to support Sierra as well. Toe took the lead and performed her Ice Flash skill with her Ice Sword. She wondered if it was immune to weapons, but there was only one way to find out. She got close enough to strike, but quickly realized there was some kind of barrier. Toe noticed right away that magic had no effect on the monster. It turned out the Kalane could manipulate magic particles with its horns. Nito thought that perhaps they needed to destroy those horns. But before they could do anything, the Kalane unleashed a beam of light. But Sierra quickly used her magic to create a shield, which was just enough to offer protection. She created 2 magic circles at the same time, but the creature used a thunderous roar to destroy them. Nito thought deeply and decided they probably needed to change tactics. Instead of using brute force, they should analyze things more carefully. If the creature controls magic particles, then its attacks must be magical in nature. Its invulnerability must have a weak point somewhere. Nito finally came up with a solid plan. When the monster fired its beam of light, he noticed a part of the light within the beam vanished almost instantly. The goal was to aim for that gap. Toa, worried, spoke about the possibility of Nito getting hit. She offered to be a decoy, but Nito told her he'd finish things quickly. He activated the skill Soul Break. As the monster fired its beam of light, Nito was able to break through the monster's barrier and destroy its horns. Now, the Kalane can no longer block our attacks. He asked them for more time, as there was something else he wanted to try. Sierra was too surprised to say much, while Toe begged that whatever happened, and everything that had happened so far, must be kept a secret within the castle. A messenger reported the sighting of a Kalain surrounded by magic particles in the Grill Forest. The informants were 4 adventurers, and they later reported to the messenger that they had been injured and were now being treated at the hospital. According to them, some adventurers had stayed behind to confront the monster. One of the adventurers was a silver-haired woman wielding a rapier. The messenger was told to report what he had just said to Hilda. The messenger arrived to deliver the report to none other than the respected leader of the White King Knights, Reinhardt Rickman, who was certainly no stranger to the identity of the silver-haired woman, Sierra. However, the news left him in disbelief, learning that Sierra was currently in a battle against a giant Kalain. 2 days ago, when everyone in Tanya Village had gone to sleep, Nito checked Oliver's status. Oliver was a fire magic user, possessing elemental magic that Nito wasn't sure he could use. Just then, a notification appeared, looking like a quest notification. The message contained information about Oliver's beloved wife, Anna, who had dedicated her life to becoming a knight and had even been promoted to a leadership role, all out of her love for him. However, when he returned from a grueling battle one fateful day, he received the heartbreaking news that Anna had turned to a life of thievery and tragically died while attempting a heist. This revelation plunged Oliver into deep despair. To worsen his pain, his comrades added salt to the wound by mocking his tragic fate. The letter contained further disturbing information about the king's assassination, which only piqued Nito's curiosity. Nito couldn't help but wonder why Oliver would accept such a grave mission. There was a lot the message didn't explain, but when he finished reading, he received the magic skill, Hellfire. This skill was the result of a flame born from Oliver's hatred, which would gradually incinerate its target. Nito's anxiety soared. He had no idea how to start learning this new magic skill and wondered if it was as unstable as elemental magic. Another thing was that he didn't recognize the spell associated with the skill. He slumped to the ground, dejected, and decided he hated being a healer. Then he had an idea to use the skill in reverse. The opposite of fire is water, which seemed worth a try. He proceeded to activate Mischievous Reversal through God of Revenge's Mischief. The Hellfire magic was instantly reversed into Goddess's Bloody Tears. He began to feel a sensation he couldn't explain, a dark energy surrounding him, giving him sharp claws and blood-red eyes, allowing him to see into another dimension. Nito watched the Kalain beast slowly disintegrate until only a pile of mush and a pool of blood remained. To asked him if it was over, and he announced that the strange feeling he'd felt earlier was gone. They heard a rustling in the bushes and knew someone was coming, so they had to get out of there before they were spotted. Nito didn't want to be discovered or become the center of attention as the one who killed the beast, so he urged Sierra to finish things up while he and Toa found a place to hide. Everything that had happened so far had to be kept secret, so Nito informed Sierra that he was trusting her to handle the situation discreetly. They all planned to meet again in the capital. Toa promised to inform the innkeeper of their whereabouts. Sierra stood alone wondering who Masamune really was. Riders on horseback raced through the forest, sent to search for the adventurers fighting the Kalain. Part of the group were the White Knights, Raid Black and Hilda Ikerlat. Raid eagerly awaited the battle with the beast, planning to slash it with his scythe. When they arrived at the location, they found nothing, no Kalain, no adventurers. Then they looked closer and saw a formless black mass. They decided it must be the remains of the Kalain. Raid didn't think anyone would believe this, but it was their only clue for now. They found Sierra and asked her many questions, but she wasn't very cooperative. When asked about the 2 other adventurers accompanying her, she replied that they were no longer here. The knights couldn't believe that Sierra could take down a Kalain with her strength alone. Raid concluded that the other adventurers had been eaten by the Kalain. This still didn't explain how Sierra defeated the monster on her own, but for now, it was a plausible reason. They decided to contact the knight's office and gather whatever items they could find in the area. Reinhardt reported to King Rashausen that Sierra had eliminated the monster, but her condition was still unstable, so they would need to wait for the results to confirm. The king was pleased with the report and allowed Reinhardt to continue his investigation. Outside the palace chamber, the White King's knight, Daniel King, was waiting for Reinhardt. He tried to pry information out of Reinhardt, asking questions to which Reinhardt only replied that they were still investigating. Daniel pressed for any information, and Reinhardt had to make him understand that he was also completely in the dark about the situation. The Kalain's remains are currently with the autopsy team, so they'll have to wait for the results. But if Daniel felt up to it, he could go ask Sierra directly what happened. Daniel began to suspect that something fishy might have happened. Reinhardt revealed that Sierra had indeed been involved in the battle along with 2 other adventurers who were now missing. When the knights arrived on the scene, the Kalane's body was in such bad shape, it was hard to confirm if it was really a Kalane. Moreover, there was an extremely large amount of blood present, which only added to the mystery. Daniel deduced that the missing adventurers were the missing piece of the puzzle. Sierra knew what happened, but she had no intention of making a statement. Daniel asked how far they had investigated Sierra, and Reinhardt said he wouldn't press her for what she wasn't willing to say. The important thing was, if those 2 adventurers had defeated the Kalane, then they were as strong as the White Knights, if not stronger. Reinhardt added that Daniel couldn't possibly see that happening, that someone could be stronger than their own leader. Reinhardt shrugged, unable to be certain. But Sierra had better hope the missing adventurers weren't a danger or a threat to the country. Because if they were, she would face the consequences for keeping quiet about them. At this point, only one thing needed to be cleared up. Were they friend or foe? Nito shouldn't have been able to control elemental magic, and he decided to seal that skill from now on. The fact that he could break the Kalane's horn with his bare hands was terrifying enough, but it was one step at a time. To told him that if he didn't want to use his power, she would do her best to protect him. Nito worked up the courage to ask Toa what gave her such strong faith in him from the moment they met. Before she could answer, Sierra appeared, and Nito decided to save that conversation for another time. He then apologized to Sierra for making her come all this way, and she apologized for interrupting their talk. Sierra told Nito that he had to keep a low profile for the time being. She updated them that the Kalane had been taken for an autopsy and that she had kept quiet about Nito and Toa. But she wasn't sure how long she could stall. Nito was a little disappointed that they had worked so hard for no reward. However, Sierra insisted it was best they didn't draw any attention to themselves, which meant they would have to give up the reward. While they were talking, Raid showed up. It turned out he had been following Sierra and wanted to find out who had taken down the monster. Before Nito had a chance to say anything, Raid revealed that when the White Knights were sent to face the Kalane, its horn had been broken off and was lying in a pool of blood. Normally, to kill a Kalane, you have to use physical attacks since the monster is immune to magic. However, Raid noticed that the injuries on the monster were caused by magic. He also recalled the monster's broken horns, which were normally too hard to be snapped. Raid concluded that whoever defeated this monster was not to be taken lightly. That's why Raid had been following Sierra from the start, and her trail led him to Nito and Toa. Sierra tried to reason with Raid, saying Nito and Toa weren't enemies, but the warrior was too agitated to listen. Just then, he unleashed his power and prepared to attack them. Meanwhile, Reinhardt, who was still talking with Daniel King, sensed that Raid had just released his magical power. He decided to go check out what was happening for himself. Raid charged at his opponents with a sword, but Toa managed to block the attack at the last second. When he asked her, Toa introduced herself as Toatrika and admitted to killing the Kalane. Raid was a little surprised as he thought Nito was the one who killed the monster. However, he couldn't sense any magical power from Nito, so he concluded the girl was telling the truth. Now that he knew who the monster killer was, or at least thought he did, Raid attacked Toa aggressively. Nito called out her name, but Toa told him to stay back, as she met every one of Raid's attacks with an excellent defense. Raid was surprised that Toa was strong enough to fight him and still maintain her focus. He was impressed. Raid decided to end the fight quickly by activating his fire armor skill. His use of this skill caught Toa by surprise, as she hadn't expected him to be a magic user. Raid now had the upper hand in the battle with Toa, unleashing powerful blows and throwing Toa from side to side. The White Knight challenged Toa to show her true power, saying her current strength wouldn't be enough to save her from him. Toa insisted that she was already showing her full strength, which disappointed Raid. He decided to end the match with his next blow. Luckily for Toa, Reinhardt intervened just in time, effectively stopping Raid's skill from harming her. Raid, frustrated, questioned Reinhardt's actions, but Reinhardt turned the question back on him, saying this wasn't his fight. Their exchange of words gave Nito enough time to heal Toa. Nito also asked why she didn't use her magical powers, and she replied that her magic would destroy everything around her. Apparently, she was hiding some power after all. Raid told Reinhardt that Toa was a monster slayer, but Reinhardt's reaction was unusual, almost unconcerned. Reinhardt suggested the monster slayer was just fulfilling a request. Raid insisted she had something to hide, which was why she was running away. Just then, Raid noticed Nito and asked if he was a priest, having seen him heal Toa. When he learned Nito was just a healer, he scoffed at the rank, assuming that was probably why he couldn't sense any magic from Nito. These words displeased Reinhardt, as he sensed something very different coming from Nito. Raid, fed up with the conversation, drew his sword and went into a battle stance again, focusing his attack on Toa. He claimed she was a danger and that he was saving the entire country by eliminating her. The pleas from Reinhardt and the others fell on deaf ears as the White Knight's mind was made up. With his sword, he lunged towards Toa. The result was a cloud of dust. And when it cleared, Raid was lying unconscious on the ground. Toa was the only one left in the area, as Nito had moved the rest of their friends to a safe distance in the instant Raid attacked. Now, without a doubt, Reinhardt realized that Nito was the one who had defeated the Kalain. Sierra rushed in, begging Reinhardt not to do anything, and promising that Nito Masamune was not an enemy. Reinhardt realized he had unconsciously drawn his sword, so he sheathed it and apologized for Raid's actions. He clarified that from the very beginning he had sensed something different from Nito. Usually when someone's magical power is overwhelmingly superior, it becomes difficult for others to sense it. This was likely why Raid couldn't sense anything from Nito. Nito explained why he hadn't shown himself sooner, saying he didn't want to stand out. Reinhardt completely understood and promised to take full responsibility in his report. He also promised to state that he and Toa were merely assisting Sierra in slaying the monster. He promised to give them the reward and said his farewells. Carrying Raid on his back, Reinhardt hoped to meet Nito again someday. From Nito's perspective, he had simply given Raid a light punch, with no intention of revealing his identity with that move. Back at the palace, Daniel King brought Reinhardt some more interesting news about the Kalain. From what the autopsy revealed, the monster was no ordinary Kalain. Given the structure of its internal organs, they could see that it was already dead before it even faced the adventurers. This could only mean that someone was manipulating the sacred beast from behind the scenes. Daniel King and Reinhardt agreed that this probably wouldn't be the last time. Hearing this, they knew they had to prepare for the unforeseen dangers approaching their country. After the events of the past few days, Sierra invited Nito and Toa to her family home, the residence of the Eckerlot family. Nito teased Sierra about being a lady from a noble family, but she replied that she just wanted to be known as a knight. Sierra's parents, Bron and Maria, gave Nito and Toa a warm welcome. They revealed that Sierra had told them so much about Nito, one might even say she talked a little too much. Just then, Sierra's beautiful older sister, Hilda, appeared to join them for dinner. She introduced herself, and Nito looked stunned. Hilda had also heard tales of Nito's bravery, including the recent incident with the Kalain. Thinking about this, Nito realized that both Sierra and Hilda were members of the White Knights. This thought made him wonder if Hilda knew his secret, either as a member of the White Knights or of the Eckerlot family. Nito praised the family for having 2 daughters in the ranks of the king's White Knights. Hilda replied humbly, saying a position had just opened up that they could fill. According to her, she and Sierra had studied swordsmanship since they were children and became knights of the kingdom. Eventually, their skills were recognized and they became White Knights. However, she stressed that their talent was nothing compared to Reinhardt, who was chosen as a White Knight at only 12 years old, a true prodigy. However, Hilda also noted that Reinhardt's talent might not be on par with Nito's, making Nito's heart race as he wondered just how much she knew. Sierra jumped in at this point, warning Nito to be careful of her sister, calling her a predatory snake with a woman's charm. Hilda playfully teased Sierra, asking if Nito was her boyfriend. She even went a step further, asking Nito what he had done to Sierra. As Sierra's cheeks flushed red, Nito found himself enjoying the interaction between the 2 White Knight sisters. Just then, Toa joined the conversation, telling Sierra to leave Nito alone. Oh, it looks like Sierra has a rival, and it's not her sister. Toa was holding a bottle, and it was hard to hide the fact that she was drunk. In the end, Nito took Toa back to her room. He also teased Sierra about her sister's attitude. Sierra wondered why Toa seemed to be closer to Nito than she was, even though they had both met Toa at the same time. Nito admitted he was curious too and decided he would ask next time. Sierra led Nito to another room before saying goodbye. She offered to teach him a few things about swordsmanship the next day, if he was interested. Nito's original plan was to go to the guild to earn some money the next day. But he agreed to her offer, which made Sierra ecstatic. He was so lost in thought about Hilda's expression that he didn't notice her sneaking up behind him. Hilda's attire was a bit revealing, but she insisted she was just passing by. She also asked if Nito had really defeated Raid, and Nito confirmed he did it to save Toa. She deduced that he and Toa had feelings for each other, but Nito got flustered and denied it. Hilda pleaded with Nito to look after her little sister, saying this was the first time Sierra had ever shown interest in a man. She also asked Nito to take Sierra with him when he leaves the country, whether she likes it or not, because she felt it was for her own good. Hilda said that her sister deserved to know more about the world than just swinging a sword, which is all she's done her whole life. Nito woke up the next morning and found Hilda lying in his bed. He confronted her, and she said that there was no one in her bed. She asked him if he'd done something wrong, and Nito couldn't give a straight answer. Just then, Sierra walked into the room and her expression changed. It was a difficult situation to explain, but Nito tried to convince Sierra that it wasn't what it looked like. That afternoon, they began their sword training. Although he didn't expect to learn it in just one day, the training was harder than Nito had imagined. Sierra revealed that she started learning swordsmanship when she was only 3 years old. Hilda also started around that age. It all happened after Hilda got lost in the forest and was attacked by a Leo wolf. Luckily, their father came to the rescue. He taught his daughters how to use a sword and magic. Nito found it hard to believe that their gentle father was strong enough to defeat an S-rank Leo wolf. According to the ranking system, a Leo wolf was said to be even stronger than the new Kalain. Knights and adventurers from all over the kingdom often had to work together to barely defeat one. Nito secretly wished he could face the monster one day. He asked about anyone currently in the kingdom who had fought an S-rank monster, and they pointed him to Reinhardt, saying he was the only one who would know. In the guild, there are S-rank quests that require defeating S-rank monsters. These monsters are very rare in the currently peaceful kingdom of Verzazan. Sometimes you might get an S-rank quest to defeat an A-rank monster, because the same type of monster could be B-rank, S-rank, or higher depending on its level. Nito asked how a level 500 mimic would be ranked, and they replied that its rank status would be unranked or infinite class if it even existed, since the guild's ranking system doesn't go beyond SSS rank monsters. Nito asked if she thought such a monster existed, and Sierra replied that even if it did, anyone who encountered it would surely be long dead, which is probably why they remain unidentified. Nito recalled the dungeon where he had met the mimic, and wondered why he hadn't asked Cheon more about that place. Nito woke up in a strange place even though he remembered falling asleep at Sierra's house that day. He wondered if he was dead. Then he looked back and saw Cheon standing behind him. He drew his weapon, but the swordsman calmed him down, saying he hadn't come to fight. He invited Nito to take a walk with him. They walked for a while until they met another person, who said he had been waiting for Nito because he was the one who had invited him. Nito didn't recognize the young man, and he sensed this. So the young man decided to transform into a form Nito would know better. When Nito saw the new form and heard the new voice, he recognized it from the dungeon, the one who told him to drink the potion for more power. Cheon introduced the being as his comrade, but the being stopped him from revealing its name. Nito was disappointed he couldn't learn the being's name, but in his heart he had a feeling it was the God of Vengeance. When he said it out loud, he watched Cheon's reaction and concluded he was right. The God of Vengeance said that while this place was unfamiliar to Nito, it was a prison for him and Cheon. The god also revealed that he had summoned Nito's soul using the effects of the elixir Nito had drunk back then. He assured Nito that his real body was currently asleep back at Sierra's house. When asked, the god revealed that the elixir was actually his blood, and it grants anyone who drinks it a unique random skill. The skill granted is an unknown infinite skill, though some skills might be unusable. The god also revealed that he didn't summon Nito to drink the elixir, and the vial was just placed there as an experiment. Nito realized he would have been dead if not for his good fortune. One of the reasons they summoned him was for Cheon to pass on his sword techniques to Nito. At first, Nito thought this would involve training with them, like with Sierra and Hilda, but Cheon assured him it would only take a moment. Nito asked if this was the main reason he was summoned, but they held back the answer. He asked a few more questions, but the vengeful god chose to remain silent. Still, he was sure he'd get his answers one day. Oh great, another mystery that needs to be solved. Nito knew this act would be just as painful as drinking an elixir. The answer had finally come. Nito felt he had come a long way since then, so he concluded the pain wouldn't be unbearable. From the moment Cheon placed his hand on Nito's forehead until he pulled it away, the young healer felt an unimaginable pain. However, he also saw the techniques being transferred before his very eyes. He received visions of memories of various sword techniques, and also saw a technique that was still unnamed. Cheon introduced it as his special technique, saying that it was a technique that had no weaknesses. The vengeful god instructed Nito to go to an event at the bay to find a woman named Madame Fran. He had to tell her the exact phrase, "I will wait for you on that hill." If she asked a question, he had to reply, "It's in the third drawer," to make her understand. Nito could barely keep track of everything that was happening, but he tried to commit the words to memory. The vengeful god also advised Nito to go to his school and learn magic, even though he was just a healer. His knowledge of his profession would increase through study. According to the vengeful god, magic is limitless, a statement Nito was very happy to hear. Sheon also instructed Nito to give his sword to the demon girl, as it was a special sword not suitable for him. Nito was surprised they knew so much about him. It felt like they were always watching him or something.